category, which is I guest starred on Scooby-Doo. Jeff, start the bidding.
I can name 4.
Paul, he knows a lot about Scooby-Doo. But Paul says you got it. 4 out of 5 will knock $750 off your debt. I'm the creepy TV family that hired Scooby's gang to watch over Pugsley and Wednesday's spooky mansion.
The Addams Family.
That's one. As the mystery of the spooky fog unfurled, I'm the former Fife who enlisted the Mystery Machine Gang.
Don Knotts?
Yes. 2 to go. I'm Curly Neal's uptown basketball team that helped Scooby solve the puzzle of a pirate ship.
The Harlem Globetrotters.
That's 3. I guest starred on Scooby-Doo. Final question if you get this. Those meddling kids are no Hogan family. I'm the Wheatstone actress who guest starred with the Scoopster on a haunted movie set.
Sandy Duncan.
You have the money. $750 off your debt.
Scooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Doo, where are you? We need some help from you now. Come on, Scooby-Doo, I see you. You got a silver. You're the new to me, 'cause I can see.
Hello, Scoopsters.
Hello, fools and ghouls. On tonight's episode of A Pod Named Scooby-Doo, for those of you who don't know, Ben and I are both students at Hofstra University, and tonight with us we have Professor Tarson, who is a professor in the radio, TV, and film department at Hofstra, and from that intro clip we saw him on a game show just acing a Scooby-Doo category. Professor Tarson, would you like to tell us a little bit about how your appearance on that show came to be and what that was like?
Sure, and it's great to be on the show, guys. Yeah, I was on this game show, and that portion of the game show is a little bit like, if people know, Name That Tune. Everybody knows that, but you kind of challenge the other player to how many you can name from a category. I, being a devotee of Scooby-Doo the early days, when they said they were guest stars on Scooby-Doo, I was like, okay, I'm going to do well in this category. So I said there are 5 questions, and I said I could name 4. The guy I was competing against looked at me like I was crazy and said, absolutely, go ahead and go for it. And I got the first 4, so I never found out the 5th question, but I think I would have gotten it as well because I used to watch Scooby-Doo movies at that point. So who knew that my knowledge of Scooby-Doo would pay off? I eventually, on that game show, won over $7,000, not specifically from that category, but I think that category was a turning point in the game because I sort of was able to leapfrog him and eventually make it to the final round. So I have Scooby-Doo to thank.
Crazy. And it all comes full circle right here. So
Sure
we all watched the first 2 episodes of the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And some refreshers on the Scooby-Doo movies after from 1972 that featured celebrities. On the watch of the first 2 episodes, Kalle, just to start, what were your thoughts watching something that came out in 1969 that is a very different animation style that has a laugh track, which struck me, and something that just off the bat is very different than the things we've been watching?
Yeah, the laugh track is definitely something that stood out to me right away, because even though I've seen most of these older episodes, because I used to watch them as a kid all the time and I had all the DVDs, I didn't remember the laugh track part of it. And then obviously, since Ben, you and I have been watching the ones from our childhood with the different voice actors, like, it was just weird going back and hearing how it used to sound and now comparing that to where it's at now.
Is there something that struck either of you just about watching a pilot for a children's animated show that kind of like brings you into the world a bit of Scooby-Doo? Because for us who are aware of Scooby-Doo, it's like, oh yeah, they're teenagers, they're solving mysteries. But for someone watching it for the first time, I feel like it jumps right into it. Is there something right off the bat that you think kind of strikes a chord that you're like, oh, okay, this is why this became popular?
You know, it's funny. I've always wondered, why did this become popular? And I think I read a little bit about it after the fact, but I do think that the big thing is that it's a mystery. And I don't think that, because I grew up, I was 5 when Scooby-Doo, Where Are You came out. And so I don't think I watched it literally when it first came out, but within a couple of years because they were showing reruns like crazy. And that's the thing that gets me is there wasn't a show like that. There was not a show. There were adventure shows and there were goofy comedy shows, animation, and the animation, by the way, is horrible, and it gets worse. In that version, I mean, if you watch some of the later Scooby-Doo movie ones, and I think it's worse than it is in the original. But I think that was it. And what's hilarious to me watching the pilot is, as we all know what the template is, at least I know from this series, the early series, what the template is of who's going to have done it, and the sort of lack of suspense in some ways. What's amazing in the first one is there's no other. There's one suspect. That's it. It's like it's got to be this one person, knowing the template. But because it was the pilot, I think nobody knew that yet. So you could watch it and sort of think, well, maybe it is this, ghostly night. Maybe it is some sort of exterior force. And I love the fact that you are sort of thrown right into it. It doesn't feel like a pilot. My guess, I don't know exactly the history, but my guess is they probably made a whole bunch of them. I don't think that they just made that one and said, hey, how's it going to do? I don't think you could probably do that with animation. So they just decided to air this one first. The other thing I noticed that was missing was the vehicle. The mystery machine is not in that first episode, so I noticed that too.
Yeah, and something kind of like you were saying, something we've been talking about a lot, especially on the last few from the mid-2000s live-action movies, was do you watch this for the mystery element? Because sometimes some of the incarnations of Scooby are really based around the whodunit, and sometimes now, as it's become more synonymous in popular culture, it's really been based around just the fun of Scooby-Doo and Shaggy and the gang, and them finding themselves as characters and more development in their character from the one-dimensional that we see at the start. So off the bat, watching it for me, yeah, that hit me too, where I was like, oh, there's only one, it can only be this one person that they've named and seen. So there's no suspense there. But in some ways, I think introducing it to an audience helps a lot with that, because you're just kind of also establishing they are teenagers. They are kind of detectives. They're also definitely breaking the law in cartoon form almost all the time. And it definitely makes it easier, I think, to digest if you're a kid on Saturday morning cartoons. A lot of Hanna-Barbera cartoons were only on for 1 or 2 years and were built for reruns. And so I feel like a lot of these were really just based around, let's churn out something that's fun for kids to sit down and watch. And it comes out to be this. Kaylee, is there anything else that struck you on the first watch of the two?
I think it's probably just because we've been watching the more recent stuff for our first few episodes, and how we talked a lot about how there's like humor for adults, and then it's also a children's show. But like these earlier versions, it's like purely just a children's show. It's just simple. These kids are gonna solve some mysteries with their talking dog, and you can probably figure out who it is, but who knows who's gonna be under the mask, and that's basically it. Which, it's still an enjoyable show. It's just very different because it was the most basic in the first version.
Yeah, and something we've been asking on each one that started with this incarnation that we know, where Scooby talks a lot. A talking dog, they kind of give him that kind of like the Jetsons Astro voice. And at the start, Scooby just talks right away, and there's nothing wrong with it. And as we've been seeing, Scooby says stuff that maybe alludes to the fact that he doesn't know he might be a dog. And so in this one, he talks a lot. He has Scooby snacks immediately. There's no, those meddling kids, which I remembered a lot at the end of each episode, but there was none of that. That struck me as, I was like, I feel like there was a tagline at the end. But the question being, in the early Scooby-Doos, do we think Scooby-Doo is aware he's a dog? Kaylee, do you want to start?
Well, there aren't moments where people refer to him as a dog and he goes, "Frog? Where?" In these ones, where it's just confusing because he does multiple times.
Yes,
yes,
it does happen.
It happens like
very
3
randomly
times per movie in like the early 2000s versions. It's very strange. So that doesn't happen here. There's no real indication that he either does or doesn't. It's just sort of he's a talking dog and he's there, but I can't say whether he knows that or not.
Yeah, I think the animation too, for me, kind of struck with this because the way he runs, it's cartoonish. It's supposed to be for kids, but the speaking, and even there's a shot in the first one where they're in a car or van or something, and he looks like he's double the size of a person. And I was like, oh my God, he looks ginormous.
Yeah, he is huge.
And for me, watching it, because I knew that I was going to ask this, I was thinking, well, does Scooby-Doo here, if I'm inferring things, does he know he's a dog? And I have to think that he's so blissfully unaware of the world around him, even in these first ones where he's just jumping into flower pots and running away from things, and his teeth are chattering, and Velma ties it up with a handkerchief. It's so playful that I have to assume that that's where this whole idea started from the early cartoons, that he's so human-like, it passed the point of him being any more than just another member of the gang. Do we have any other thoughts on this?
I never thought to ask myself that question. And obviously, I haven't seen the movies where he has the existential crisis. So I've always thought that he knows he's a dog, but he's a very happy, fortunate dog. Except, these are things you may have talked about in other podcasts, but what is, I think, wonderful about the show is the combination of being interesting and fun to watch and also crazy. Why does Fred, who I always thought is Fred, but he's called Freddy every time I see him in the episodes that I watch. So I'll say Freddy. For some reason in my mind, I think of him.
Yeah, they interchange them a lot.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd. He's clearly like the leader of the gang, and even in I think it's the first episode. If not, it's the one with the hex, where they're constantly volunteering the two people who are the most scared, the least reliable, to do things. And so, I think it's the first one where it's like, oh, Shaggy, you're the thinnest, go up and climb through that window. And you're like, what? First of all, I'm not sure he is the thinnest. It seems to me Daphne might be thinner, just looking proportionally. But secondly, I feel like it's clear that the two of them are going to be scared. And so the plans are often kind of crazy. Like if you think of how you would go south the street, it's kind of ridiculous. I also think that one thing that's interesting about the pilot is that what are they doing? Where are they going? Like what it's very, this is probably, counted on throughout all the various versions is like, are they in school? The only one I watched one from the second season, which is called Jeepers. It's the Creeper, I think. Which I'd like to talk about a little later. But in it, it's the only time that I can remember. I'm sure there are other episodes, but there are a lot of other kids around. There are a lot of the school kids around. There's a big dance, and it's sort of a reminder that there is this world that they're part of. That's not just the five of them traveling around in a big van, randomly running into like a ghost town or something. So I don't know. I guess I'm wonderfully intrigued by the simplicity of this show, and that it's maintained its popularity. That it's, here we are talking about, as I'm saying, I was 5 when it came out. So 50 some years later, it's still something that everybody knows about. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and there's a moment after they say Shaggy's thin where I think Daphne says, oh, he's like the best gymnastics line, a 60s style line, and he just goes zooming upwards into this window. And it's at that moment I realized the show tells you very quickly, suspend your disbelief. It tells you, even no matter who's watching, it says whatever you think, whatever weird questions we can come up with, it says we're not going to answer that. We're not even going to entertain your questions, whether they go to high school or what they're doing, just roaming around, just deciding, oh, we're going to solve a mystery. They don't go to the police and say, oh, we thought someone got murdered.
But and I will say the thing that I do like about the show, which I think is worthy of comment, is that the whole point of the show, I gather, was to make children realize that if not to be scared, that if they see something that's really unusual, or that they think that there's something under their bed, or there's a ghost in the closet or whatever, like this is all about explaining that, like, hey, and it's constantly said, like I even wrote down some lines. There's this one in the Funland episode, which I watched today, where Velma says, it defies all the known laws of physics. And first of all, I don't think you see that on too many animated shows that are geared towards kids anyway, but like they're constantly reminding little kids that, no, don't be scared. This is going to have an answer that is probably obvious. Since again, there might be only one or two possibilities, but it's not going to be jurists, occult, eerie reason. It's going to be this totally understandable crime, usually some sort of crime. And you're right. I mean, I love that. I love the fun with which they sort of just dive right into that the creators, just sort of, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it every episode. And clearly everybody responded.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why it's been able to like keep going for so long, and why they can make so many new versions, even though it stays mostly the same, other than the ones from when Ben and I were kids, where we've realized that the monsters and ghosts in all of those movies are actual like ghosts and monsters. There's no unmasking. It's just like actual scary stuff is happening.
Wow.
And then with now like the most recent iteration, which is Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, where there's like a celebrity guest every time, they're like going back to what they did like in the 70s and all that stuff, where they had the Harlem Globetrotters and all these people on. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about those sort of celebrity ones from the early days.
Well, I don't know if either of you got a chance to watch them. I can't imagine you know any of those people. You'd be my guess.
Yeah.
It's not just that they were minor celebrities for the most part. They were minor celebrities from 1972, 1973. They weren't long. It wasn't like, I don't know, Barbara Streisand or something was on, where you'd be like, oh, well, she had this long career, and this was her at that age. I watched one that was with the guest star was Jonathan Winters. Now, Jonathan Winters, you may or may not know, was a major comedian and sort of one of the first improv comedians, really, and a huge inspiration for Robin Williams. And he was a guest, and he was on show. He was in the later years. He was on a couple of sitcoms, regular sitcoms, when he was older. I don't know when he passed away, but quite a while ago. But Sandy Duncan, who was like a name at the time, Mama Cass Elliott from the group called the Mamas and the Papas in the 60s, she died in 1974. Like, these are people who are, ephemeral in terms of their popularity. So it's hilarious to see that. And the other thing I love about that show is, and then Batman and Robin would be a guest star.
Yes.
And the Three Stooges. And, it was just, first of all, it was Hanna-Barbera using their whole stable of people. I mean, it probably was them thinking at that point, wait a minute, it's what created the show, which is like the last time I remember being aware of Scooby-Doo was like the late 70s, I think, mid to late 70s, where they basically just had every Hanna-Barbera character, every episode, and competing against each other. There was this thing called Battle of the Network Stars at the time that was real people. And I think they just said, hey, we can do it Saturday morning, and use all of their own people going back years. But it's goofy. Like, what world are we in that Batman and Robin is there? And Sonny and Cher, like, are they in the same world? Are we all in the same world together? And as you were saying, Ben, I think it's just sort of, we're going to suspend all disbelief, and we're just going to have fun. And there is some, there is this balance. I mean, as a writer myself, I was kind of thinking, like, how do they stretch this for a half hour? Like, it's a half an hour. For those movie ones that were, with the guest stars, it's an hour. Well, that's a long time to stretch a mystery with no secondary story, and where it's relatively obvious. So they really did balance the sort of goofy comedy scenes with the chase scenes with a clue. For every, certain number of minutes, there'd be a clue. And, they somehow found a way that worked. I mean, I think the movies are pretty, as I said, I don't think they hold up. The one with Jonathan Winters is not bad from what I understand of all of them. But it's after seeing it, I was like, I'm going to go back to the first ones because I think they're better and remind me more of what I liked when I used to watch the show. And the second season, reading about the second season of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, is when they would have all the chase scenes set to music, original music, because I think they were trying to copy the Archies, which had been before my time, but had been this show based on Archie comics, which was a cartoon show, but out of that came this group, that called the Archies, that had this number one song, Sugar Sugar, which was like this number one song in 1969. And I think that they just said, wait a minute, let's do it. So they did Josie and the Pussycats, where they would have original music. I don't know if, obviously it's not part of this podcast, but there's some crossover, and it was Hanna-Barbera as well. And so I guess they hired whatever group it was to write original music for each of these chase scenes. And in the one that I watched, this Jeepers Creeper, it's the song that makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's all about, it's called, it starts with daydreaming or something about daydreaming of you. And then it turns into this, I'm in love with an ostrich. That's the lyrics. I'm in love with an ostrich, and something about sticking their head in that. Very British, very kind of influenced maybe by Davy Jones and the Monkees, which is another person. I think he might have even guessed it on one of those. I don't remember, but he would be the kind of celebrity that they would have on the movies. And it's so evocative of that time period that for me, it's nostalgic. But for anybody else, it must just look like what was going on in 1971, 1972 with this flower-colored van, and anyway, that's so. After I had actually leading up to this, it said, "Hey, I'd love to talk about these Scooby-Doo movies," and that was the subject that I did well with on the game show. I watched a little, and I was like, you know what? We don't have to talk about the Scooby-Doo movies.
That's a perfect segue, because you were saying the movies, they're not built for reruns like the show was. The show made only 2 seasons, but 30-something episodes, I believe, more. And the movies are 40-something minutes plus commercials. Obviously, when you watch it now, there are no commercials. And something I wanted to ask is, as a writing professor, and you were kind of got into it a bit, do you think the celebrities, because you can only do so much with, there's one with Dick Van Dyke, and they go, oh, hi, Dick Van Dyke, and then it's like he's just a part of the gang. And that's, you kind of add that in, but it doesn't give any more time. Maybe you cut more to a celebrity talking. When they're 21 minutes compared to 40-something minutes, do you think that helps your entertainment level, or do you just think for the older ones it just throws it down the toilet, per se, because it's just too long for you to be able to tap into that nostalgia? What do you think from a writing perspective could help out, 40-minute episode for a series could really help that entertain someone for longer, whether it be a kid or an adult?
I mean, it's odd for me to say this after what I just said, but probably music. Like, I could see, like, if you had a guest star who was a singer, and it's like, hey, what's that new hit single you're working on, Sonny and Cher? I don't know, because that episode actually isn't available on for rerun. I didn't see that as the list that you could watch on Boomerang. So, and it could have been that they just said no, they didn't get the rights. I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked. But that would be one thing, because then it becomes kind of a variety show. But I agree with you. I mean, I think that, there's the particularly young kids' attention span is limited. And so I think you have to have this comedy and this back and forth between comic set pieces, like scenes, chase scenes, and goofy. Like, there was another one, I don't remember which one it was, where Shaggy ends up like dressed as a fortune teller and is theoretically giving, and then not Shaggy, excuse me, it's Scooby is dressed as the fortune teller, but Shaggy's throwing his voice, which, by the way, I have to say, I'd completely forgotten that was theoretically a talent that Shaggy had. I had no idea until I watched these episodes that was supposed to be, oh, he's a great voice thrower. And it's referenced also in the Jonathan Winters one, because the reason he works as a guest star more than others is that he was a comedian. And so he did different voices. That was kind of his thing, was he could play all these different characters. So they could use that within the realm of the show, and it worked better. I would think it would be harder for just like Jerry Reed. I think they had, which was somebody I remember when it was on. I remember Jerry Reed and going, "Who's Jerry Reed?" And I was living at that time, but he was like a country and western star, kind of a country and western comedy star. I guess he was on Hee Haw. I'm probably referencing 9,000 things that nobody who's listening to this has ever heard of before. But I think, what are you going to do to show off that celebrity? And you're right, they all just dive in with Mama Cass, with Cass Elliot. They just find her in this, she's kidnapped or something, trapped on the top of a candy factory, and then she's like, "Hey kids, save me," and they come to save her, and it turns out she's making her own brand of candy. And for the Jonathan Winters, they find him at like a gas station, and he's on his way to visit his friend of hers, is this older woman who he also voices because it was one of his characters. So there were things about the Jonathan Winters episode that made sense from a writing standpoint, that was like, oh, you have a lot of things to tap into here, but I don't know how you do it with some of the others.
Yeah.
I don't think they probably did,
Yeah, it's a tough spot because when we watch it now, too, like you were saying, the celebrities they used then were referential and topical, and that kind of, I feel like, could tap into, too, the adults watching. Maybe that's some of the nostalgias for the adults who were watching at the time would be aware, at least semi-aware, hopefully, of the celebrity and would watch it more. And so the modern day one that's, I think, 30 minutes, it picks, there's comedian Jim Gaffigan, Ricky Gervais is on one, there's a musician Casey Musgraves is on one, and so there's more, I think, diversity in the people they choose, but also the shorter episodes, and I feel like now they're using more of that person's influence in their sphere to get people to watch, whereas in the early 70s it was kind of just, oh my god, there's Batman and Robin with Scooby-Doo. Whoa.
Batman and Robin. You know what I mean? Like, I guess if you were watching superhero things, because I was a big superhero fan, so, Super Friends, which was actually their appearance on this predates Super Friends. It was before Super Friends started, which sort of started the whole, all through the 70s, there were all these, the DC heroes were on animated television, again. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think it makes more sense who they have, like who they have and how they use them. And 30 minutes is plenty. 40 minutes of Sandy Duncan or whoever, I can't even remember, Dick Van Dyke. I didn't see the Dick Van Dyke one. I mean, he's at least somebody that's a little bit more of a name. Like, I think a lot more people would know who Dick Van Dyke is. He's still alive.
Well, that's why, too, people would know who he is now.
Yeah.
But especially back then, too. Something you said, too, just before we started that I thought was interesting was, just speaking on the history a bit, is, Scooby-Doo, it only runs from 1969 to 1970-ish. And then there's like a little break, they do the movies, and then to get ratings up, they add in this character, Scrappy-Doo. We've talked on here a little bit about our hatred, our collective hatred, it seems like, of Scrappy-Doo. And Kalle, I think I've asked you this before, but is there a reason why people from our generation just hate Scrappy-Doo?
Well, for our generation specifically, in the first live-action movie, Scrappy-Doo is the villain.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, yes. And so...
What's funny,
alert.
even in that, though, it's referenced that, like, they already hate him in the movie.
Yeah. And they have the flashback of him peeing on Daphne, and then they throw him out of the van.
So
great.
It's like they already hate him. It's kind of like we grew up and we were told, like, hate Scrappy-Doo. Like, it was in a book somewhere, and we were just told, like, hate him. But
yeah, he was just always annoying, and nobody liked him. Like, because the first live-action movie, it came out in, like, 2002 or something.
Yeah.
And, like, just his introduction in the movie is him peeing on Daphne, getting thrown out of the van, and the whole gang hates him and then never speaks to him again. And at the end of the movie, he's revealed to be the villain. So I think that's probably a big part of the reason why our generation doesn't like him, because we're just immediately thrown into, this dog is annoying, nobody likes him, he's evil and the villain, and just nobody likes him.
Is there a reason you think, I think you're about to answer it, but is there a reason initially that you think when they bring Scrappy-Doo on to raise ratings, by the way, they bring a character on because they're like, we need something fresh.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that you think immediately people turned against him and were like, we do not like this?
I mean, to me, it was that he was sort of he sort of was a scene stealer. Like he was like it felt like they were like, people are gonna love this character, and then you found him annoying, and it naturally pushed Scooby-Doo into a different role than he had on the series. Up to that point, Scooby-Doo was the sort of, goofy, scared, one. I was thinking about one of the things, again, if you were going to look at it purely from like an educational standpoint, if you're going to like, hey, we'll sell it to the network as like, but this is good for kids. One of the things that's smart is that they make the character that might represent a kid who's scared the lead. They make they make Scooby-Doo, oh my gosh, I'm scared. And so, it's not talking down to kids. It's sort of like, hey, you're just like this dog that's scared, but at the end we find out it's Mr. Jenkins. We shouldn't be worried. He's just running, illegal mining or whatever it is, whatever the episode is about, And it's never anything it's never like a narcotics ring. It's always, something minor. But Scrappy-Doo then pushed Scooby-Doo into being like the sensible one. It was like, oh, practically like taking care of the mess Scrappy-Doo made. Well, that's not fun, and that's not what we liked Scooby-Doo for. And I read something about this, and again, I have to admit, this was all, I kind of went to Wikipedia, because I haven't really read a lot about Hanna-Barbera, but it did say that when they were developing the show, they were trying to decide what they wanted for the dog character, whether they wanted a small type dog that was feisty and brave, or whether they wanted a big dog that was scared. And they ultimately went with, as we know, the big dog that was scared. I just think that's a better choice, because Scrappy-Doo is basically a small dog that's feisty, and and I think maybe they thought that would be fun for little kids to see a small character, but it does not work. It really doesn't. No. And so I think it's wonderful that whether it's innate, or whether the creators are passing it down generations, that it's passed down to your generation as don't like Scrappy-Doo, because you shouldn't.
It's also
mistake from the beginning.
Yeah, there's also the Greg Garmore writing. It's the younger brother phenom for Scrappy-Doo.
Just gonna say that. That's so weird.
There's I don't think canonically Scrappy-Doo is the younger brother of Scooby-Doo. I think he's his nephew.
I think he's a nephew.
Yeah.
I think he's supposed to be a nephew. Uncle. I think he says it's Uncle Scooby.
Yeah, and it's definitely, like you were kind of saying, the introduction is kind of like, okay, here's this little guy who likes to talk a lot, and he's going to run around a lot, and we like seeing initially Scooby and Shaggy are the ones who should make the mess, and the gang should go, oh, it's okay, guys, you figured it out, though. And
also they should be volunteered. Yeah, Scooby and Shaggy, the two, you dress up as the ghosts and catch the thing, even though you're scared out of your minds. But yeah, you're right. Like Scrappy just totally changed that recipe. The recipe that worked in whatever way it did was totally thrown out the window by Scrappy-Doo. And I kind of stopped watching it at that point. Although I remember the Laugh Olympics a little bit, which I think was after that.
Yeah, but I think the Scrappy-Doo being like the younger sibling type of character is exactly why he's annoying. He's just, first of all, he's physically smaller, so you just already see him as like the littler one, and then he's just constantly running his mouth and like messing things up. And so, like, as someone who has two younger brothers, I'm like, I deal with this in real life. I don't need to see a little dog bothering Scooby. Like, I get it. We're right there.
And stealing the spotlight from
the exactly
character, It reminds me there's an early episode of The Simpsons, I don't know if you've ever seen, but where Poochie is added as one of the characters in the Itchy and Scratchy show. It's a great and I always felt like that's kind of like maybe they even had that as an inspiration of like bring on this character and it's supposed to be all this wonderful, everybody's gonna love this character, and it's a total bomb. And maybe who knows, in animation they refer to the Scrappy-Doo effect. I don't know, because I haven't been in those rooms, but I wouldn't be surprised.
There's also a film in the 70s called Scooby Goes Hollywood that's entirely a self-referential about Scooby-Doo selling to a different network, going to a different time slot, and about Scooby being famous. And I think some of the point with Scrappy-Doo and with the new Scooby-Doo movies with feature all the celebrities is they're all self-referential in a way. Scooby-Doo very quickly breaks the fourth wall, and they stare at the camera in the first episode. They're in the library, the famous shot, and they all look up at the camera. There's not really a basis for breaking the fourth wall around this time. I mean, I'm not going to say it's definitely not the first time people have done it in animation either, but it's a different element, I think, to the show that now we watch it and we're like, that's a little like, wait, that's a little funky, because we're kind of drilled to notice these things more. But the self-referential nature and the adding the celebrities and, like you were saying, creating this world, it has such a different effect. Do we have any thoughts on maybe does this add something, a different quality to Scooby-Doo that separates it from like a show that already has a talking dog, or the Jetsons, which takes place in the future, because it's grounded in reality with people, but it breaks every other rule in the book?
Well, I mean, I will say that in Hanna-Barbera, the Flintstones did that occasionally, where somebody would, and I remember it always bugged me then, because basically you're watching this thing, and then suddenly, Barney would say, I wonder what I should do. Like, he would turn to the camera and sort of talk out his thoughts, or I bet you know what I'm going to do. And it wasn't every episode, but it was like, suddenly we were in a play, and somebody was letting us in on it. And it was, I didn't like that quality. But I think it may come from comedies more. I think, I don't think they do that on Johnny Quest, or one of those other adventure shows in the 60s where, it was like, how are we going to get away from this problem, or this, somebody's chasing after us. And so I think that's the other thing that Scooby-Doo had, which was this comedy. It was this mystery comedy. And I wonder if that's why they stole that effect. Except for the French thing, it's interesting. I haven't thought about that though, in terms of like the stars, and and that they're meeting celebrities and not being fazed by it at all. It's not like what Dick Van Dyke. Oh my gosh, it's Dick Van Dyke. It's kind of like, oh hi Dick, you want to join us? It's a very strange thing. I don't know. I don't really have an answer as to whether it made it better, but I think that's why maybe.
And it's so. To me, watching it and considering the reincarnations of Scooby, they're honestly more drastic than I remembered. And something we've asked, and this is going to be an awful segue, but something we've asked on each one is Scooby-Doo, you wouldn't think of it as a movie to watch on a date. And Kaylee and I were considering, well, what if you're with someone, you're with a partner, and they picked out a Scooby-Doo movie? And so we asked this each time, and I'll answer, and then Kaylee, and we can go around. Going for, I guess, the original series and the movies, the new Scooby-Doo movies, are these good date movies? If someone picked and said, let's watch Scooby-Doo and the Harlem Globetrotters, would you say, oh, I want a second date? And I think if someone picked either of these, the original series or the movies from 1972, I would say no to a second date, even though I'd be like, oh, the interesting pick. Wow, you really hit a deep cut there. But I would say no based on the fact alone that they're boring. They're hard to get through. You don't sit there and go, I want to watch another. You sit there and go, how many minutes are left? Oh my God, they've only hit this point. And for me alone, you have to be really sharp in your conversation on a date if you're going to be watching these movies, because you're going to have to make some awkward jokes when there's the laugh track going and no one in the room laughs. And that will happen. Kaylee, what's your answer? Are either of these good date movies or shows?
I know I have gone on record to say that any Scooby movie is a good date movie, but I'm gonna retract my statement.
Oh.
Yeah, I think if we're talking first date movie, I would not want to watch like any episodes of Scooby-Doo Where Are You, or any of the movies with Sandy Duncan or the Harlem Globetrotters or anybody. It's just a weird pick. There's so many better Scooby things to watch that if that was what the choice was, I would be concerned for what this person's taste in Scooby-Doo is, and I can't deal with that. So I'm going to say no.
And passing it along, Tarson, do you think it would be...
hard no. Absolutely not. And honestly, I would say if any first date is like, let's watch an old 1960s, 70s animated, not particularly well animated TV show on the first date, I would say, nice knowing you. You know, I think that they're fun from a nostalgic standpoint. If I was dating somebody, you know, that at not my age, if I was dating somebody and it was like, oh, you know, I don't know, not the first date, but somewhere down the line, look what's on, you know, then it might be a fun walk down memory lane. I certainly connect, you know, when I remember when Wayne's World, the movie, came out, and that was the first time I ever remember the concept of referencing the, you know, would have gotten away if it weren't for you meddling kids concept. Wow, that is exactly what Scooby-Doo, Where Are You was. And there was joy in that because it was like, oh yeah, we all lived through that together. And like that, like, you know, it was that much of a cultural touchstone that we all had that, but not as a date. No, no, I would definitely not recommend it.
On the opposite side too, these feel like something that my dad would turn on the TV and see, oh my God, Super Friends. I remember when everyone watched that, and my mom will turn to him and go, no, I don't. No, I didn't watch that. No. And so there's this idea too of nostalgia in some sense, but then there's also saying it and someone else having an entirely different experience and going, I don't remember this either at all or fondly, and I think something that the Scooby-Doo original series does hit is it hits that nostalgia bone in the first episode for a few minutes, and then you go, I remember this being shorter, or I remember this being more entertaining, obviously.
Yeah.
And it changes a lot of how you watch and how you think about maybe when you were a child, what you would watch, which maybe you appreciate some of the other things that you watch now more.
Not to sound like an old timer, but I know I will. You know, there wasn't much choice. You know, I mean, I read something about how the reason Scooby-Doo got so popular was like in that first season, whether this is true or not, but something like 65% of at some point of people watching TV, kids watching TV, were watching that show. Now, granted, it's different than it is now. So, but there were still 2 other networks plus PBS that was available to everybody. And where I grew up outside New York City, so we had, you know, Channel 5, Channel 11, you had the other kind of local stations. So to have 65% watching one show means that it really connected with the kids at that time period, you know. So it was something that everybody, but it was partially because there was nothing else good on. I mean, if you go back and see some of the live action shows from that, you know, every show seemed to have a budget of about $1.50. You know, and you see these, you know, live actions are the worst. Land of the Lost or one of those shows where you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they had the audacity to shoot this and put it on television because it's so cheaply made. And you look at the animation here, and the animation is just so rudimentary. You know, I mean, and you know, in some ways that was the Flintstones, which was actually a primetime show, had some bad animation, but I think that the writing was better on a show like that. I think the writing, you know, they were writing for adults and kids, and so the writing was a little bit better than this, which is really, as you said, just like, I'm sure they were thinking, oh my gosh, you got 22 minutes to fill. How long can we delay till they find the footprint, till they find the bucket of paint, the string in the back or whatever that reminds them that something's going on.
And I think that's a perfect way to get to our last question, which we do at the end of each, which is we rank these from a nostalgic ranking and a current watch ranking. So I'm going to group them all together. I'm going to call this Original Scooby, the movies plus the series. If you want to separate it, you can. I'm going to group them a bit. And we rate these out of 10 Scooby snacks. You can pick what decimal point you like to go to. And I'll go first and then Kalle. I think my nostalgic watch, because I remember being a kid and I had VHS tapes and I had DVDs and I would watch these and newer ones also, and I remember as a kid not really seeing like a huge difference between them. Like, both entertained me as a kid. So my nostalgic rating, I think I'll give these a 7.5 out of 10. I think that's where I'm gonna put all of these collectively, because I really liked the Batman and Robin and the Harlem Globetrotters because I was semi-aware of who they were, but I wasn't so into it that I was like, oh my God, the Harlem Globetrotters. I was like, oh, great, Scooby was the thing I was obsessed with. And then, oh, cool, also Harlem Globetrotters. Nice. My current watch, I think I have to give it some points because it is the original. It's the start. Anything that's the start, I think, automatically gets some points. So I think I'll give this a fair, I think I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10, which could be a lot worse. But I think, like you were saying, on the rewatch of some of the movies just do not hold up. And I think they bring it down. And the series holds up in some sense for the nostalgia, but once you start nitpicking and seeing the animation and you see the backgrounds when they're running and you go, that's the same background going over and over again. Things like that get into our minds now as more avid viewers, we hit and we go, oh my God, like your brain is like, I just can't function with this on. And we all have kind of turned that switch because we've all been watching so much stuff over the past, collectively over, how many decades now. Kaylee, what are your 2 ratings overall?
Nostalgia rating, I'm going to do the same as you, a 7.5, because I also remember enjoying these just as much as any other Scooby when I was a kid. Like, I didn't see any difference. I just was entertained by it. I had a DVD of, like, the first 10 episodes of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Or something, and I remember watching it, like, just on a loop all the time. Rewatching it now, I'm trying to remember what rating I gave Zombie Island, because I hated that one, and I don't want to give this a lower rating. I feel like I gave Zombie Island like a 6
Yeah,
out of 10
I think it was a
on
6.
my current watch. So I'll give this one a 6.5.
Wow.
It's still entertaining. Like, I still enjoy watching it because I remember watching it so much. And, like, yes, there are obviously problems, but it's the original Scooby. There are going to be problems, and I can still watch it and enjoy it. So 6.5.
Wow. Okay, and let's hear the final ratings from Tarson.
Well, I think from a nostalgia point, obviously that's the reason to watch it, and those are the ones that I know. So I'm going to give it a 9. I think it's nostalgic, very nostalgic for me, and in a sort of classic, beautiful sense, which is separate from an aesthetic. Is it really something that we would want to put in the Smithsonian as something that represents us as a culture? So I would say probably, I don't know a lot of the other stuff that you've been covering. So I'm just going to put it right in the middle with a 5 and say, it's not great. There are real issues. I don't know where it is on the sort of spectrum. So I'll give it a 5 there, but obviously I would give it a high, and I would separate the two. I think the Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? I would put like about a 9.5. And I would put the movies maybe down at an 8.5. Just the kitsch factor is fun, but I think I prefer the first 2 seasons. Yeah,
great, fair. I mean, all fair points. We can't thank you enough for coming on and talking for about 45 minutes. I mean, as 2 people who love Scooby-Doo, it's always great seeing different perspectives of people coming on and going, well, I never thought of that ever. Intriguing. So it's always fun seeing, and thank you so much. And I'm going to play the outro after Kaylee hits us with her famous last lines.
Ruh-roh, looks like we're all out of time. We'll see you next time on A Pod Named Scooby-Doo.
Story which is, I guess.
I can name 4.
Paul, he knows a lot about Scooby-Doo. And Paul says you got it. 4 out of 5 will knock $750 off your debt. I'm the creepy TV family that hired Scooby's gang to watch over Pugsley and Wednesday's spooky mansion.
The Addams Family.
That's one. As the mystery of the spooky fog unfurled, I'm the former Fife who enlisted the Mystery Machine Gang.
Don Knotts?
Yes. 2 to go. I'm Curly Neal's uptown basketball team that helped Scooby solve the puzzle of a pirate ship.
The Harlem Globetrotters.
That's 3. I guest starred on Scooby-Doo. Final question, if you get this. Those meddling kids are no Hogan family. I'm the wheat-thin actress who guest starred with the Scoopster on a haunted movie set.
Sandy Duncan.
You have the money. $750 off your debt.